Hi there, grade 12s, and welcome to my classroom. Today we're going to be talking about dihybrid crosses. Now, before we start with the example that I've prepared for you, we need to first ask ourselves, what is a dihybrid cross? Now, remember, a dihybrid cross is between two organisms, and they are different from each other in two traits. That's why we talk about a dihybrid cross, that di part meaning two. And this also means that we're going to be using two different letters. This example comes from the Life Science Paper 2 question paper for February-March in 2017. This paper can be downloaded from any DBE website as well as the WCED. The question here is, coat color in mice is controlled by two alleles, black and gray, and they then give us a capital B and a small b. And they're telling us here that the capital B represents the dominant allele, so black will be dominant and gray will be recessive. Tail length is controlled by two alleles, long and short, and here they give us that the long one will be the dominant characteristic and short will be the recessive characteristic. Now the pattern diagram below shows a part of the cross between two mice, and they've left out genotype I. If we have a look at the questions, okay, in 1.6.1a, they want to know the genotype of parent 1. So they want to know the genotype of this parent over here. Right, so let's have a look. If we have a remember, we need 4 letters next to each other. So let's have a look at the B's first. There's a capital B over there, and there's a small b over there, which means for the first set of alleles, the parent will definitely have a 1 capital B and 1 small b. And then if we have a look at the T's for the tail, we have 1 capital T over there and 1 small t over there, which means for the second part, we will have a capital T and a small letter T. Just remember, it doesn't matter how many times the specific capital letter or small letter occurs, it's about how many types there are. Then if we have a look at question number B, the phenotype of parent 2, just be careful here. They're being a bit sneaky here because they're asking for genotype there, genotype here, and then suddenly for a phenotype here in the middle. So you have to read very carefully. So for phenotype of parent 2, now you'll see that parent 2 can only give capital B's to the offspring, which makes the parent definitely will be black. That will be the first on the part. And then if we have a look at, they can only give small letter T's, which means they'll have a short tail. Excuse my writing here. I'm doing this with a mouse. Then if we have a look at 1.6.1c, the genotype of that missing offspring. Okay, so now we're looking for the genotype over there. Now remember here, we want to take the gamete produced by that parent over there and the gamete produced over there, and they will come together and give you that particular offspring. Now remember, it is important to remember that we always put the alleles in alphabetical order, and we always place the capital letters first. So we've got B's and T's. Now B is before T in the alphabet, and we've got a capital B and we've got a small b. So we're going to have the capital B first, then the small b, and then we'll put the capital T second, and then the small t. Then if we have a look at 1.6.2, what percentage of the offspring above is gray with short tails? Now, if we look at the offspring here, you'll see that there are some of them that are showing short tails. Now, remember, short is a recessive characteristic, so it means they need to have 2 small t's to be able to show that characteristic. So there's quite a number of them that are showing that particular characteristic. But for them to be gray, they need to have 2 small letter b's next to each other, and that does not happen. Which means if we go to the question when they want to know how many of them will have that combination of the 2 recessive characteristics, the answer there will be 0%. Then question 1.6.3, state the genotypes of the two gametes from the table above that will result in offspring that are heterozygous for both traits if fertilization occurs. Right, so the first thing we do is we go and look and highlight all of those offspring that are heterozygous for both characteristics. And as you can see, it's only those four. That means that that gamete over there is a definite possibility, as well as any of these. And then since they're all the same, there is only two types, and that will be small letter b, capital T, as well as capital B, small t. Remember to separate your answers by enough space or by a comma or by something to indicate to the examiner that's two separate gametes. And there you are. Our next question comes from the Life Science paper 2, February-March of 2018 paper. So they're giving us two plant species with two characteristics. There's flower color and there's plant height. And they're saying that flowers might either be red or white, and the plants may either be tall or short. So that is the basic information we start with what species are we looking at, what characteristics can they possibly have. Now in the second paragraph, they're telling us that the plants that are heterozygous for flower color have red flowers, and plants that are homozygous recessive for plant height are short. The purpose of this paragraph is so that you have to figure out what characteristic is dominant and what characteristic is recessive. So let's have a look at our flower color first. If the plant is heterozygous, that means that the two alleles are not the same. They have red flowers, okay? That means that if there's a capital letter and a small letter, and they're going to show us here in the table, they show us we're going to use two Fs. So if we have a capital letter F and a small letter F, the plant is red. That makes red our dominant allele and white our recessive allele, okay? Then if we have a look at the height of the plants, if they say we've got them as homozygous recessive, which means two small letters, okay, then the plant is short. That means that the recessive allele is short and the dominant allele will then be tall. Right, so let's get to the questions. So what is the term given for a genetic cross involving two characteristics, okay? Now the answer there is a dihybrid cross, and here I just would like to remind you that remember the mono means one and di means two. So it's a dihybrid cross because we're looking at two characteristics here. Our next question is, give the dominant phenotype for flower color. Okay, and because we did that information already, we know that the dominant one will be red. In the next question, they want to know, give the recessive phenotype for plant height. That's also the one that we already figured out. So that would be the one over there, and that would be short. In our next question, they say, give the phenotype of a plant that is heterozygous for flower color and homozygous dominant for plant height, which means what they're looking for here is they're looking for heterozygous. Heterozygous means that the two alleles will not be the same. So we're going to need one capital F and one small letter f, and homozygous dominant for plant height, which means we're only going to need the capital H and we're going to need two of them. Okay, which means, and remember they're asking for phenotype. They're not asking for genotype, they're asking for phenotype. So they're looking for a plant that is expressing the dominant characteristics in both, okay? And that would be red and tall. One mark for red, one mark for tall. In the next question, they want the genotype of a white flowering short plant, okay? Now, if we go back to our information right at the beginning, we would know that if it is white, it means that it's going to need two small letter Fs, and if it is short, it's going to need two small letter H's. So there's our answer. But it's very important to note here, they didn't split the marks into two separate marks. It's a double mark or nothing. So you have to have the two small letter F's and the two small letter H's. They have to be close enough to each other so you can see it's one organism, and you have to have all 4 letters in sequence correct to be able to get those 2 marks. Then our last question is state Mendel's law of dominance. Now, in the memo, if you look at the memo, you'll see that there's 2 options, okay? Now, in the first option, they're talking about organisms that is pure breeding, which means these organisms are homozygous, okay? So if we cross the 2 organisms, the pure breeding or homozygous, then the contrasting traits are crossed, and all of the individuals of the F1 generation will display the dominant characteristic. Okay, now the other option is if you didn't look at pure breeding organisms, but you actually looked at ones that were heterozygous, so they had a small letter and a capital letter, okay? So if you have an organism that is heterozygous, then the dominant allele will determine the phenotype.